Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30. I'm Jeff Baker, the chair of DRCOG, and I'm going to call this meeting to order for December the 18th, 2024. As we always do, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Stevens, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I may just do a quick disclaimer for people who have not joined us for a virtual meeting yet. I just want to let directors know that it takes us a minute to pull everyone over to the panelist side. So if I do call your name and you're not able to respond, I promise at the end of it that I will ask if there's anyone who was called on it and was unable to answer. And so with that, I will go ahead and start the roll.
Okay.
I'm sorry? Oh, maybe someone was unmuted. My apologies. Okay, here we go. Adams County, Steve Odorizio.
I'm here.
There we go. Jeff Baker, Arapahoe County.
Good evening.
All right. Claire Levy, Boulder County.
Present.
Austin Ward, City and County, Broomfield. James Marsh Holshin, City and County, Broomfield. Randy Wheelock, Clear Creek County. George Marlin, Clear Creek County. Adam Paul, Denver.
Present.
Kevin Flynn, Denver. Chantel Lewis, Denver. George Teal, Douglas. Oh, my apologies. Thank you, Chantel. George Teal, Douglas County. Abe Layden, Douglas County. Marie Mornis, Gilpin County. Andy Kerr, Jefferson County. Leslie Dahlkemper, Jefferson County. Sharon Davis, Arvada.
Here.
Thank you. Angela Lawson, Aurora.
Here.
Larry Vidham, Bennett.
Here.
David Spellman, Blackhawk. Nicole Spear, Boulder.
Here.
Margot Ramson, Bomar. Greg Mills, Brighton.
Here.
Deborah Mulvey, Castle Pines.
Here.
Tim Dietz, Castle Rock. Jason Gray, Castle Rock. Tammy Maurer, Centennial.
Present.
Todd Williams, Central City. Randy Wheel, Cherry Hills Village. Earl Holen, Cherry Hills Village. Steve Douglas, Commerce City.
Present.
Michelle Rogers, Dacono. Adam Moorhead, Dacono. Steve Conklin, Edgewater.
Here. Good evening. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Othaniel Sierra, Inglewood.
Present.
Emily Bayer, Erie.
Good evening.
Thank you. Linda Montoya, Federal Heights. Sarah Dawn Pearlstein, Federal Heights. Ray Bird, Firestone. Don Cognac, Firestone. Josie Cockrell, Foxfield. Lisa Jones, Foxfield. Wendy Padilla, Frederick. Lynette Kelsey, Georgetown.
Here.
Rachel Binkley, Glendale.
Present.
Paul Hazeman, Golden.
Present.
George Lance, Greenwood Village.
Present.
Chuck Harmon, Idaho Springs.
Here.
Brian Wong, Lafayette.
Here.
Jeslyn Sherzai, Lakewood.
Present.
Stephen Barr, Littleton.
Here.
Kat Bristow, Lockbuoy.
Present.
Marissa Harmon, Lone Tree.
Here. Thank you.
Of course. Joan Peck, Longmont. Aaron Rodriguez, Longmont. Judy Kern, Louisville.
Present.
Holly Rogan, Lyons. Mark Browning, Lyons. Colleen Whitlow, Meade.
Here.
Paul Sutton, Morrison. Adam Way, Morrison. Nicole Sterling, Nederland. Richard Kondo, North Glen.
Here, happy holidays.
Thank you. John Dyack, Parker.
Here.
Terrence Kelly, Sheridan.
Present.
Neil Shaw, Superior. Sandy Hammerly, Superior. Justin Martinez, Thornton.
Here.
Sarah Nurmella, Westminster.
Here.
Bud Starker, Wheat Ridge. Rachel Houtine, Wheat Ridge. Darius Pakbaz, CDOT.
Present.
Sally Chafee, CDOT. Bill Soroy, RTD.
Here.
All right. And if there was anyone that was unable to answer when we did the roll, if you could just raise your virtual hand and I'll read off your name. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So with that, Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And I just want to make one note about our agenda this evening. Under informational briefings, the second informational briefing, Crash Data Consortium Update, will not be presented tonight. So if anybody is attending specifically to hear that, that will be postponed to a later meeting. With that, I will ask if there's a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
I would move to approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion about that? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Seeing none, our agenda has been approved. Thank you very much, everyone. We have 2 action items. Well, actually, I'm sorry, we're going to go to the consent agenda. I got too far down on the agenda there. First of all, I want to tell you that our report of the chair, we have, we're going to be closing nominations for people to put their name in the hat to be on the executive committee on Friday, December the 20th. So if that's something you've been meaning to get around to and you just haven't done it yet, this would be the time to do it. Tonight, tomorrow, or at the very latest on Friday the 20th. Please think about that very strongly and fill out the paperwork that's necessary to throw your hat in the ring. After that, I will ask for a report from the Performance and Engagement Committee. Director Conklin?
We did not meet, so there's no report.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to ask for a report from the Finance and Budget Committee. Director Kondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, earlier, we had met virtually and approved 3 action items, mostly administrative in nature, to allow the executive director to either extend a contract or authorize consulting services for 2 different transit corridor analyses, I guess, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that's all I have to report. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you, Director Kondo. Next up is report of the Executive Director, Mr. Rex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and good evening, everybody. It's great seeing you all. The one thing I may note from the Finance and Budget Committee that is certainly monumental is we had a report of our of this year's audit, which is conducted by CLA, and which they've been doing it for, I don't know, 4 years or so now. So we have a clean audit. I want to thank Jenny and all her staff for all the tremendous work that they do, as well as all of our divisions, right, in checking those boxes, crossing T's, dotting I's to make sure that we remain in compliance with everything we do. So we're very proud of our financial track record. And again, I want to thank Jenny so very, very much for everything she does. I just have a few things for you tonight. The first on Proposition 123 local capacity grants. So DOLA has announced a third cycle for the local capacity grants. If you're not familiar with that, the capacity grants, they support local government efforts to implement systems that fast track or expedite the development review process for affordable housing. These funds can also support local government capacity to achieve local affordable housing goals and local government's Prop 123 commitments. Many grantees are exploring land use code amendments, implementing process improvements to streamline the development review process, or investing in permitting software as part of their strategy. Others will use the grant funds to inventory potential properties for future affordable housing projects, designate a liaison to work with developers, implement a housing action plan, implement programs for affordable housing, or efforts to achieve Prop 123 goals, such as preservation of mobile home parks. So obviously capacity project can take a number of shapes. And I think, the reason we're bringing this up today is that, the next cycle will open up on February 14th and close on March 14th. And there will be an informational webinar on prospective applicants on Thursday, January 9th from 11 to 12:30. And we'll be sending you out some information regarding that. But we're bringing it to your attention tonight because I really think that DOLA is interested in seeing more applications from the Denver region associated with these capacity grants. So if you're so inclined, please check out that webinar. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, reach out to myself or Sheila Lynch. And if we don't know the answers, we'll seek them for you. So please give that some consideration. The next thing I want to talk to you real quick about is part of our decarbonization program. It's related to that EPA grant that we received back in the summer. So we're in the process of putting together a technical committee now. So we're looking for senior and director level staff from local governments with some subject matter expertise in building decarbonization or sustainability. We have a number of seats, we have 2 seats available for the larger counties, 1 seat for the smaller counties. And you've seen kind of the makeup of what that committee looks like. So if you have staff that might be interested in this, please encourage them to reach out to us, most notably probably Robert Spots on our staff. And just so you all know, because I'm not sure you do know this, so Robert Spots he has become the manager of that program. So we're really excited for Robert. He's been on this right from the beginning, and I know he's excited about the opportunity here too. So big shout out to Robert. Let me see. The chair already mentioned the board officer solicitation, which closes this Friday. I also want to note that early in the new year, before we meet again, we will be sending out a solicitation for the various regional committees. We hold appointments and we have seats on various regional committees around the region, such as the State Transportation Advisory Committee, E470, the newly created, and hopefully we'll take action on that tonight, the Economic Development District Advisory Committee, the Advisory Committee on Aging, and others. So we're going to send out a solicitation, and the board, the nominating committee will consider those and make a recommendation to the board, and will be acted on at the February meeting. So I just wanted to give you a quick heads up on that. And Mr. Chairman, last but not least, again, I just want to also echo the comments that have been made to wish everyone just a wonderful holiday season. Please take some time and spend with your family and friends, and we all look forward to working with every single one of you in 2025. Thank you also very much for everything you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rex. Next up is public comment. Up to 45 minutes is allocated now for public comment, and each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. If there are additional requests from the public to address the board, time will be allocated at the end of the meeting to complete public comment. The chair requests that there be no public comment on issues for which a prior public hearing has been held before this board. Consent and action items will begin immediately after the last speaker. Ms. Stevens, do we have anyone online or calling in that would like to address the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I do not see any hands raised, so I would defer to you.
All right. I'm not seeing anything either. So with that, we will close the public comment time and we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items on it. I'm hoping everyone has had a chance to review those items and wondering if anyone would like to pull either any of those 5 items off consent agenda for further discussion. I'm not seeing any hands raised for that either. All right. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Director Sherzai.
Second.
And Director Kern with a second. Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Or any abstentions? Seeing none, our consent agenda items have been approved. Thank you very much. We have 2 action items to look at tonight. The first one is a discussion of DRCOG's Economic Development District Advisory Committee. We're going to hear from Director Flo Raitano, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about this. Flo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an item that we brought to the board in the work session earlier this month, and there was some discussion and recommendations. And so staff has considered those and made some changes, and I would like to go over those this evening so that you get a better understanding of what's being recommended. I do want to preface this by saying that I both don't want to undersell the importance of the Economic Development District Advisory Committee, but I also don't want to overstate its importance. This is a worker committee that will really be dealing at the policy oversight level, and it is our intent not ever to get engaged in anything that would involve distribution of funds or attraction of industries to the region and have those types of conversations. This is purely at the conversation level of policy. So with that, let me share my screen. And you should be able to see the Economic Development District Advisory Committee document on your screens. And so what the changes that we made really is in the category of the economic development interests. And those would be that we increase the number of local government economic development agencies and entities from 7 to 15. And that makes the committee relatively large, but we still think that it's still functional and still workable. And having different voices at the table is really the intent of what we had intended all along with the EDAC. So we still are looking at having up to 4 members of the DRCOG board, and those, of course, we would like people that will be part of the notice that Director Rex talked about going out in January. So be looking for that. And then also the executive director or his designee will be serving on that council as well. The Office of Economic Development and International Trade, which is a state level agency to facilitate coordination, the same with the Colorado Workforce Development Council, executive director or their designee, and then representatives from regional labor or other labor groups, or even possibly some county workforce development councils as well. So when we come down to the economic development interests, that has now a membership total of 18 and up to 15 members representing various county or municipal economic development agencies. There is still a designated seat for the president of the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation or his designee. And you know, that we know Ray pretty well. So it will be Ray or whoever he decides on his team best serves that purpose. And then we're also looking at including 2 representatives of organizations serving low income and or disadvantaged communities as their primary audience. And these are entities that we worked with in the development of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. And you can see in the SEDS document input that was gathered from the focus groups that they provided, and it was a pretty important aspect of informing our policy document for the SEDS. And then other members, up to 4 members representing education. Of course, we want K-12, community colleges, and 4-year colleges. Up to 5 members representing large employers and or manufacturing in the region. We are beginning to see an increase in manufacturing in the Denver metro region, and that's pretty important. And then finally, 1 representative of a financial institution. So those are the recommendations. As before, we would ask that the state agencies and Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation designates annually in February in writing to the DRCOG executive director who their representatives will be. And then other members shall be appointed annually by the committee chair upon recommendation of the executive director of DRCOG. We are providing for officers, a chair and a vice chair to serve 2-year terms. And then elections shall be held during the first quarter of odd number years. So we're coming up to 2025, and sometime in January, February, or March, we will hold election for the chair and vice chair of the EDAC. If there is a vacancy occurring in between regular elections, we are providing the ability to hold a special election to replace the chair or the vice chair, whoever has resigned from that position. You'll see from the responsibilities, I told you I didn't want to undersell, but I also didn't want to oversell this. And it's really to provide direction of development and implementation of our SEDS strategy and oversight of the EDD activities. That's pretty important to provide feedback to the EDA because there will be annual updates to the SEDS. And every 5 years, there is a pretty deep dive to revisit the SEDS and see, you know, if things are still working or we need to change focus in the SEDS or what's going on. And then the committee will review and recommend those annual updates and the 5-year recommended changes to you, the DRCOG Board of Directors, for adoption regarding the SEDS. So you still retain the final say on what is in our comprehensive economic development strategy. We understand that with 36 members, quorum could be an issue. So as we took advantage of some of the other committees that we have listed in our committee guidebook, and established that a quorum shall be 1/3 of the members of the committee. So that would be essentially 12. But for voting, it's a majority of those present and voting shall decide any question brought before the meeting. So that's the organizational framework and guidework that we are proposing for the EDACC. Doug, I don't know if you have any other additional comments you'd like to make, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Executive Director Rex.
Mr. Chairman, yes, if I may. Thank you, Flo, for that. Yeah, I just want to provide a little more context with regards to the change that we made associated with the local government representation on there. If you recall from the board work session, we had 7 members from local governments and we increased that to 15. Now, is that an arbitrary number? No, kind of, although we kind of did the math, right? I mean, most counties provide some type of economic development function, as well as opportunities for larger cities that kind of play in that space too to participate if they so desire. So that was kind of our reasoning associated with that. I will say also, based on your feedback, that we had 2 permanent seats on the committee that in the draft proposal that we showed you at the board work session. One was for Metro Denver EDC, and quite frankly, from myself and Flo's perspective, that's really a prerequisite for us going forward with this type of work. The other way we had was Denver South, and based on part of the conversation that we had with you all, that was probably not appropriate to have a permanent seat for Denver South and not consider others. And I think we can get in a long discussion about who exactly or what type of regional associations should get permanent seats. So we just decided just to remove that one and just increase the number to 15, and hopefully that will suffice in us and build up our representation. So I'm sure Flo and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Oh, I see Director Sherazai has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate this. It feels super responsive to the conversation that we had earlier this month at the work session. So appreciate that change. My question really is like someone like the Women's Chamber Small Business, would the qualifier behind the 15th of county or municipal, where do agencies like that go? Is it possible to even consider amending that so it's just 15 economic development agencies, which would be robust enough to include county and municipalities, but some of those other more nuanced groups?
Flo, you want to address that?
Yeah, this is actually a requirement of the EDA. So it's not that we can just throw them in the general economic development pool. We have to specifically call out those interests, and there are a number of entities that we could work with in terms of meeting those criteria. So the Women's Chamber, the EDA for Black communities, the Hispanic Chamber, the Asian Pacific American Chamber. There's a number of those out there, and actually we had a number of them serving on the leadership team in the development of the SEDS. So they're familiar with us, they're familiar with the SEDS, and so it's not like we would be bringing, having to spend a lot of time educating the members of the EDAC on the SEDS and the purpose of the EDD and those types of things.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Executive Director Rex.
Thank you. And Flo, you might want to unmute because I'm about to ask you a question. But we've in the actual committee guidelines themselves, I think Director Sherazai, what we're thinking, it was the 2 representatives. Flo, what is it? You might want to even share your screen just to show that. But underneath the 15 local governments, it's the 2 positions after that.
Low income and disadvantaged?
Yes, it's serving low income and or disadvantaged communities as their primary audience, and with the focus on economic development.
However, if there's additional language, Director, that you think is appropriate to have in there, or maybe even increase the number from 2, maybe it's up to 4 representing, various groups such as the ones that you mentioned and Flo mentioned. I think that would be something that we would entertain for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to diminish the importance of thinking about equity and DEI in this space. I guess I feel feelings about women being in the disadvantaged group.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. We're like 51% of the population. How can we be disadvantaged, right? But Yeah, so it's still, it goes back to MBWE designation and WBE designation and all of those considerations. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have an idea for wordsmithing. I wasn't prepared to do that tonight, but if there were other ideas, I would be really open to that. Just that feels a little insulated. I don't know that the number needs to increase, but just being thoughtful on that.
Yeah.
Thank
So-
you.
Any other questions? Comments, discussion?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Director Rex.
if the board would provide us a little bit of flexibility to add a word or two associated with that, and so that we can move forward, that would be great. And we can bring it back to you all as as an information item next time, so you see specifically what we added. But I think I understand the intent of what Director Sherzai is mentioning.
Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any hands, and I will just say that, oh, there we go. Director Odoricio.
My apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes,
So, I mean, I heard you specifically say we could very easily move that from 4 to 2. I mean, 2 to 4. If you're recommending not doing that, help us understand why not. If not, you could say up to 4. I'd be okay with making that change now.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, yeah,
please.
that was not my recommendation, Director Odoricio. I'm the one that suggested moving that up to 4. Director Sherzai suggested that maybe 2 was fine, but I'm fine with moving that up to 4 if people think that's appropriate.
I don't have a problem with extending,
Yeah,
including more folks in the tent. Regardless of what your position is on WBE, NBE, like all of those designations, they're there for a reason. And it's usually to overcome disparities, not to provide advantage. I'm a firm believer in that, and so I'm okay with adding it up to 4. And if we need to go up to 6 someday, then we do, but we can always change it, right?
that's right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
We
Then-
definitely can, yeah.
that
I'm
sounds
okay.
great.
I say we move it to 4, and then if we need to change it based on experience and data, then we do it later.
Director Raitano?
And
Well,
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what up to allows us to do is it could be 2, or it could be 3, or it could be 4. But 2 is kind of the floor.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may just add one more comment, I'm so sorry.
No
Because
problem.
actually Director Odoricio kind of it triggered me when I saw his picture come up. And it related to the conversation what we had at the board work session, right? So when we're soliciting our local government representatives, we will ensure that that there's geographic equity across our region, that we have a balanced representation across our region. So I just want you all to know that we're very conscious of that, and quite frankly, it doesn't behoove us not to be regionally balanced in this respect. So we'll be sure to make sure that's the case.
Thank you, Mr. Rex. I'm not hearing or seeing any hands
Mr.
raised.
Chairman?
Yes,
We do, Director Lewis has her hand raised.
okay. Director
Thank you.
Lewis, please go ahead.
Thank you. I would just offer that I would be in support of that, but I had a question for Mr. Rex around geographical equity, because we used to talk about this quite a bit in RTD, and I just want to make sure, like, as you all are defining it, that I understand what you mean by that. If you might take a moment to expand, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. No, appreciate that. So I was
Yeah.
primarily referring to Director Lewis to the 15 up to 15 local government representatives. We will make sure that in our recommendations moving forward that it's spatially balanced with regards to representation, that there's equal or near equal representation from Jefferson County versus Douglas County. You know what I mean? That in that respect.
Great. I assumed as much, but I didn't want to assume, so I appreciate
hear
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. And I think we're getting to consensus here. I would ask if anyone objects to moving the paragraph on disadvantaged entities to up to 4.
Looks like you might have a hand up, Mr. Baker.
Okay,
Yeah, Director Douglas, Mr. Baker.
okay. Director Douglas.
Thank you. I'm not opposed to this. I just had a question about, you asked, it came up about school districts, schools K through 12, and just wanted to know from the different cities and counties, how does this get distributed out? So a school district may have an opportunity, or a municipality. How does that work?
Flo?
So, it's not really about opportunities for funding or projects or that type of thing, but it is more about understanding the needs of all the partners at the table and how the actions of the comprehensive economic development strategy should mirror those needs and reflect those needs and make sure that they are being addressed.
Right.
And so, in terms, there are so many school districts out there that adding multiple school districts along with multiple economic development entities would really make it untenable. And so we are looking at probably one from K-12, and
Right.
who that is probably going to be recommendations of the 15 economic development agencies that are at the table. So, we will be asking people for who they think has a background in creating skills and opportunities, particularly for disadvantaged populations, but actually any of our kids. Because one of the things that we want to address with the SEDS is the fact that we've got this dichotomy in Colorado that we have the highest education level of any state in the union, but we're importing the educated workforce. We're not creating the opportunities for our own, native born and educated population. So we want to make sure that they get a chance to play in that game.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I may need some help with hands because I didn't see that hand go up. Are there any more hands up or any other comments?
There are no other that I see, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Melinda. I appreciate that. All right. If there are no questions, this is an action item. So I know we want to give some discretion to staff to make minor typographical changes, corrections, and maybe even work on those numbers a little bit more. But it's important that we, I think it's important that we move this forward. So is there a motion that we can put up on the screen, or I can look it up in my agenda? It's a very large agenda. I'm sorry. I'm not.
We have a
Fine.
hand up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Starker here. If you're looking for a motion to approve this, I would make a motion that we approve this proposal as we've amended it by consensus through the board tonight.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Starker.
And I
Yep.
second it.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Maurer. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Sorry, motion carries. Thank you, Flo. I know you've done a lot of hard work on this, so we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to the next action item. This is listed as, hang on a minute here. This is discussion of fiscal year 2024 Transportation Improvement Plan first year delays. It is attachment G in your packet. And Executive Director Rex, are you going to introduce this or do I hand it over to Brad?
You can hand it directly to Brad.
All right, we've got Brad Williams, Planner, Transportation Planning and Operations.
Thank you,
Good
Mr.
evening,
Chair.
Brad.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brad Williams, planner with DRCOG, and we'll be going over the fiscal year 24 first year TIP project delays tonight. Our current TIP policy outlines the expectations for the initiation of project phases, including how to address delays if they happen. These delays, regardless of the reasons, tie up the limited funding available for DRCOG to allocate. At the end of federal fiscal year 24 in early October, DRCOG requested that CDOT and RTD review the statuses that we've collected from sponsors over this year for projects with fiscal year 24 funding. After confirming the project statuses, DRCOG staff contacted the sponsors with project phases that were not initiated and therefore delayed to find out the reason for that their identified phase was not initiated, to discover the current status of the project, and to assist them to develop a plan to initiate the delayed project phase. To avoid a second-year delay, all sponsors identified in this report must initiate their delayed phase by July 1st, 2025. The attached report summarizes the project phases that were delayed as of October 1st. This report states that 22 projects are first-year delayed, of which 4 have already initiated since that deadline and are no longer delayed. Some of the observations that you'll see in this report are that the number of delayed projects is significantly less than last year, primarily due to the fact that we are further out from our last big call for projects, meaning the workload is a lot more manageable. Last year, we had 35 first-year delayed projects, and this year we only have 22. For the details as to why these projects are delayed, large generalizations here, but most are from the cascading effects of clearances related to right-of-way utilities or design, while the rest are due to continued hangups in CDOT's procurement process. A motion, which I'll put on the screen soon, will approve staff's recommendations to allow these projects to continue. And finally, I'd like to thank the staff from these sponsors who have helped us implement our project status system by providing us with beneficial monthly updates. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Melinda?
I don't see any either, Mr. Chair.
All right, it doesn't appear to be any questions or comments. We have a motion on the screen. Chair would entertain a motion.
I move to approve staff's recommendation to continue each project. Sorry,
Was
this
that-
is Spear. I'm sorry. I forgot my video was off, so I was eating dinner.
That's okay.
This is Director Levy. I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion from Director Spear and a second from Director Levy. Director Starker, do you have comments? Okay.
No, Chair, just trying to get my hand down. Thank you.
Gotcha. All right. Any further discussion? I do see a hand.
Yeah,
Director Levy.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This is just maybe an observation or a comment, and perhaps we can hear from CDOT about this later. But it does appear that a backlog at CDOT on being able to consider and approve intergovernmental agreements is a big part of these delays, and I think we all understand tight staffing, but it's risen to the point that in the case of Boulder County and some ARPA small urbanized area transit funding that we were awarded, we were actually at risk of not being able to get those projects out and had to make another arrangement with the Federal Transit Administration. And so, our problem was solved by a workaround, but I think it would be good to have a conversation with CDOT about what can be done to expedite the situation so that we don't have projects ready to go. And I realize that's not the sole factor, but it seems to be a factor in quite a number of these, so that we can figure out how to address this problem.
Thank you, Director Levy. Director Pakpas.
I would like to thank Director Levy for the comments. Procurement is not in my division on a specialty, but happy to take those comments back and relay the comments of this board to the appropriate officials over at CDOT.
Great. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, that motion does carry. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the hard work on that. We're going to go into our informational briefings. The first one is annual report on roadway traffic congestion in the Denver region. Max Monk is the planner for transportation planning and operations. Is he available? Or is he ready to go?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I am. Give me just a moment to share my screen here. All right, I just want to verify. Can you see my, great, thank you, Mr. Chair. All righty, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Max Monk and I'm a planner here at DRCOG. I spoke with you all probably about a year ago and I'm here to provide another update on our 2023 annual report on traffic congestion in the Denver region, so we can dive in. And I'll mention I did use a lot of imagery from RTD and CDOT. So I just want to say now, thank you. And each image is going to be noted on the slide. So thanks to those agencies. Quick agenda. I'll provide an overview of what the congestion management process is, why we do it, what it entails. We'll talk about the trends and observations we saw in 2023, specifically looking at VMT, transit ridership, and shared micromobility usage. We'll talk about how we can expect congestion to look and feel in 2050 if the trends we observed last year continue into the future. Every year we try to take on a special topic analysis. For the 2023 report, we elected to extend the analysis we performed in 2022 to see what new trends have unfolded. And then we wanted to add value to that analysis by looking at a few other things as it relates, especially to telework and the pandemic. So to talk about the congestion management process, or the CMP, it's a federally required process. So all metropolitan planning organizations above a population of, I believe, 200,000 are required to do this. And components of DRCOG's process include this report, as well as a database of a number of roadway attributes, traffic counts, and crash incidents, as well as some multimodal data metrics. To talk about what we've observed. And we'll start with vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. So VMT refers to the total mileage traveled across all vehicles on all of the roads in the region in a given day. So this is a daily metric. The blue line you see on screen represents VMT, and you can see that it grew from 2000 to roughly 2006, flattened before increasing up to about 85 million in 2019. It took a pretty strong hit from COVID before rebounding in a bit in 2021. It increased by 1% going into 2022, and we saw a 2% increase in 2020 going into 2023. And it's important to note that this is the first time since the pandemic began that we hit the same levels of VMT, and that's accounting for roughly 85,000 new residents in the region as well. So despite there being more population, we're only just hitting where we were prior to the pandemic. The green line represents VMT per capita, was just that same VMT metric as it relates to population. And I call this one out specifically because we have a target in our MetroVision plan to reach 23 VMT per capita. And as a result of telework and the pandemic, we very briefly met that goal, but we are now moving away from it. To talk about transit ridership. So this chart will look a little bit different than the last one. The blue line represents 2019 as a baseline, and the orange line represents the percentage difference in transit ridership from that baseline. So you'll see that we had a pretty strong decrease in ridership with the beginning of the pandemic. And since then, it's really gradually grown, but we're still pretty well below where we were at prior to the pandemic. And just for a better context, when I refer to this baseline, we're talking about roughly 350,000 boardings per day, per weekday in 2019. The state pilot of Zero Fare for Better Air, which made transit free for the high ozone month of August in 2022 and July and August of 2023. I just wanted to call that out because with that program, we saw the highest points of transit ridership since the pandemic began. However, despite that, we are still well below where we were at prior to the pandemic. And then we wanted to go slightly further, and this is just something we wanted to share because I think it just really captures what I think we all feel and see day to day, right? So we looked at just Google imagery of RTD's Colorado station along the light rail. And you can see that in 2019, that lot was pretty well utilized. I can't speak for exactly which day of the week this was, right? But in 2024, it was, we can see that it's a lot less utilized than it was prior to the pandemic. And again, this is pretty crude, but I think this just, really shows that we're not only seeing it in the numbers, we're seeing it day to day as well with amenities like this. And the next to talk about shared micromobility usage. So shared micromobility refers to human-scaled transportation. So vehicles that are smaller than an automobile. So thinking scooter, especially shared, so that the members of the public can rent and use them for short periods of time. You'll see that unlike the other two modes, this one has grown pretty rapidly. We've seen over tripling in ridership, and this is something that we're really excited to see. Not a silver bullet for congestion, but it is an additional choice people will be able to use, especially in an urban context. And there's reason to believe that it can help with the first last mile barrier that's often felt by transit as well. Great. Next to talk about what we expect 2050 to look like if the trends that we observed in 2023 continue onwards. So we can expect vehicle miles traveled to grow by 42% on the average 2050 weekday. So more vehicular travel on our roads. And this is, of course, accounting for an increase in population as well. We're expecting an increase in the cost associated with congestion. And when I say cost, this is just a pretty estimated calculation that's just designed to put congestion into terms that people can understand and relate to. So it factors in the time spent sitting in traffic, fuel expended, goods delayed, so on. But we can expect that to grow pretty handily going into the future. And then over 1/3 of lane miles are expected to be congested for 3 hours or more in the region in 2050. I think this really shows, and I'll show this in a map briefly here as well, but we're expecting a spatial spread. We're expecting more corridors in the region to be congested. And then lastly, we've thrown this around a lot, but it continues to be true. Congestion at 2 p.m. in 2050 is expected to look and feel a lot like it did at 5 p.m. in 2023. So we're not only expecting that spatial spread, but we're expecting it to spread more throughout the average day. So this map really highlights the corridors that we've identified as congested in 2023. So those will be the blue lines that you see on screen. So a lot of Interstate 25, Interstate 70, Interstate 270, as well as some core arterials. And then the orange lines represent additional corridors we expect to be congested by 2050. So you can see a number of additional arterials as well as freeways like US 36 and Northern I-25. So to shift gears and talk about our special topic analysis, and this is an extension of the analysis we did in 2022. And yeah, I'll just provide a brief overview, but telework became really a public health necessity with COVID, as we all know. People were encouraged and at times required to work from home to help slow the spread of the virus. Telework does continue to be prevalent, and it's an amenity or an option that a lot of employers provide, including here at DRCOG. Again, this is building on an analysis we did last year, and we did look at the same corridors. We'll go into that in more detail shortly here. And the data we looked at were really travel time data from INRIX and traffic volume data, I believe, from CDOT between 2019 and 2023. So before diving into the details of the corridors that we looked at, I want to just talk briefly about the percentage of people who work from home as a commute mode in the region. And this is derived from the US Census American Community Survey. So the blue line on screen represents the people that worked from home. And I believe this was full-time. I think that has been expanded to include part-time in recent years as well. But the green line represents non-single occupancy vehicle rate. So that's just going to include every person commuting by any mode other than driving on their own. So it'll include working from home. And I just show this to really highlight how big of an impact telework has had on this metric. We have a target in our MetroVision plan to reach a 35% non-single occupancy vehicle mode share to work. And largely because of telework, we've been able to hit and maintain that goal for a bit now. However, we are, as you can see, seeing telework rates starting to decline. So, we're starting to move towards coming out of compliance of that goal, but just wanted to call out that impact. So the corridors that we looked at should look familiar because, again, I presented this about a year ago, but the orange line you see on screen represents Lakewood to downtown Denver along US 6, which we identify as a pretty core commute corridor. Highlands Ranch to the Denver Tech Center in purple, again, C470 and Interstate 25 we recognize as a commute corridor. And then a corridor we expected to behave a little bit differently would be Mid-Aurora to the Denver Airport along Interstates 225 and 70, as well as Pena Boulevard. So to start with that first corridor, the Lakewood to Denver one, when you look at the whole average day, we're seeing higher traffic volumes in 2023 than in 2019. So there's more traffic occurring on this facility when you look at all time periods. However, there are 6% fewer vehicles during that morning peak. And this is down from 17% in 2022, and we did this analysis last year. So we haven't seen quite that same rebound for the AM peak along this corridor, but it's starting to move in that direction. We think that telecommuting and flexible schedules are a pretty key answer here. And with their impact starting to decline, it'll be curious to see how that continues into the future. Yeah. And then we looked at the Mid-Aurora to Denver International Airport corridor, and traffic was down 8% from 2019 levels in 2020, which that was, the peak of the pandemic. That's sort of what we expected. And I just want to call this out because this corridor has seen such rapid growth that in 2023, it was 8% higher than those same levels. So this corridor is by all accounts back, and this is what we've expected. The area continues to see new development and jobs coming online. The airport seeing increases in its ridership, and we're expecting congestion to continue to worsen along this corridor. And then lastly is the Highlands Ranch to the Denver Tech Center corridor. Again, higher traffic levels in 2023 than in 2019, considering all time periods. And I think that this is probably most likely due to construction. So the image that you see on screen is of C470, and you can see that there are managed lanes on this facility. And those lanes were being constructed in 2019. So I think because of the construction, it maybe wasn't the best sort of baseline to use. But yeah, I think, the managed lane has probably had a stronger impact than we gave it credit for in 2022. So I think this corridor is sort of starting to follow the same trend as that Lakewood one, where we're seeing a bit of a shift towards where we were prior to the pandemic. But yeah, managed lane is muddying things up a little bit too. And just some key takeaways, telework continues to impact travel behavior. It impacts decisions that we make, and as an amenity, it's going to cause people to take fewer trips. As these rates decline and more people move to the region, we're starting to see more traditional travel trends sort of increase or resume. And of course, trends continue to evolve geographically. So of course, the airport corridor we looked at is one we expect to grow, right? But we're seeing, unique trends along specific corridors in the region. And then to add some value, we wanted to look at additional metrics that might be impacted by telework and the effects of the pandemic. So this is from the American Community Survey. We wanted to look at the population of downtown Denver, because I think there was a lot of talk about people leaving urban centers during the peak of the pandemic. So from 2018 to 2019, we saw 11% growth, continue to grow going into 2020. However, we saw a roughly 13.5% decrease in downtown population going into 2021. And then we have started to see it tick up again. But I think the point that I want to capture here is that that decrease between 2020 and 2021, where telework really became larger than normal, I think it prompted people to reconsider some of their lifestyle choices about where they live. Maybe I don't need to live so close. If I only have to come in a couple of days a week, I might be fine with a commute, right? So I think this just helps to encapsulate that. Oh, and then the last piece I wanted to mention was that at the time that this report was created, 2022 was the most recent year at this geography. So I just did not have access to 2023 quite yet. And then next, we wanted to look at office vacancies across the region. So this data is from CoStar, which is a real estate data firm. And you can see that in 2009, sort of in the peak of the recession, we were in between 10 and 15% of an office vacancy across the region. And then as of this year, we're just shy of 15%. So I emphasize this just to show that, yes, office vacancies are high. However, they're not at unprecedented levels. However, the central business district is much higher at around 24.5%. So I think, this is a pretty good show of the impact of telework here. As employers are giving people the option to work from home, they're reducing their own demand to have office space. And I think that just speaks more to the impacts of telework. And then we also, from CoStar, looked at retail vacancy rates. So again, you can see it was between 5 and 10% in 2009 in the region. And we did see a slight increase in the vacancy rate from the pandemic, but it rebounded a lot quicker across the region than office vacancies. And again, the central business district continues to be higher in this category at around 8.5%. And this makes sense to us, right? Since we're seeing a much higher office vacancy rate downtown, the retail environment downtown responds to the office, right? It's a lot of their business. So this makes sense to us. And again, I think speaks to the impacts of telework. And then the last sort of category we wanted to look at was trends in multi-unit residential, right? We understand that office vacancy and retail vacancy might more align with the impacts of telework, but housing is a hot topic today as well. And I'm not going to speak to all of these numbers, but I think the point is that even though telework is prevalent and people are rethinking where and how they live, we're still seeing a lot of growth in the construction of housing in the region. And I think that's great. Rents are still high when you adjust for inflation, but they're not outside of the norm. And I think it's good to see that telework hasn't had an impact on this sector as well. So in conclusion, we're expecting congestion to worsen going into the future, right? And just because I've thrown all these numbers out and about what the projections show, and I just want to make it eminently clear that that this is still fully in our hands, and I think now is the time to dig into our plans and to take on the work. And we're already doing that in a lot of ways. We have transportation demand management. We have our Way to Go program that helps to switch single occupancy vehicle trips to multimodal ones. We're facilitating projects to help people be able to avoid and adapt to the worst impacts of congestion. So when people have choices, they're able to avoid, having to sit in traffic day to day. We're taking on, partnered with the state, a household travel survey. This isn't going to be directly related to congestion, but it does really inform a lot of the assumptions that we make. It's a key component of our travel demand model. So this is a really big effort that is going to help provide additional context in the future. And then, of course, we have Denver Region ITS, the Advanced Mobility Partnership, all of our wonderful partners doing a lot of great work. So, we can change the future is, I guess, the point that I want to leave you with today. So with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Max. Questions or comments? I see Sarah Nurmela.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Max. Thank you for this presentation. Some of it's good, some of it's still worrying. I just had a question. When we were looking at the transit reduction in ridership, I know that RTD reduced service. And so, because when you were showing that Colorado Station example, that looks a lot like our Wagon Road example or station up in Westminster. And but I know that one of the busiest buses was pulled from that from service. So as I don't know if there's a correlate or some type of additional layer of information that you have regarding RTD's reduction in service and how that has impacted the ridership, and as they are looking to increase service, hopefully beginning of next year, how that may or may not impact things for us too, like that it's not as dire if we can get better service back.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Director. Yeah, I think that soon after the worst impacts of the pandemic, I think people, were worried about being around other people, right? But I think that with service levels, I think that absolutely is having an impact, right? I think that I think frequency is one of the biggest things that can encourage people to use transit where they don't have to think about it, right? So I do think there's some merit in service levels being a part of the puzzle here. And I know RTD's going to be very focused on service going into 2025. So it'll be curious to see how it evolves.
Other questions?
Chair Baker, Director.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. On the selected corridors, how did they, why were these 3 corridors selected? As coming from the north up here in Commerce City, even in Brighton area, come down 76, it's congested in the morning, congested in the evening, and I don't see that on this corridor. So what made these 3 stand out and not other parts of the region?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair and Director. So we took on this analysis originally in our 2022 report, and Basically, what we did was we identified different corridors that we expected to be impacted by high levels of commuting into an office environment, right? So I think we grabbed 5 to 10 corridors, and I think the ones that told the most interesting story were the US 6 corridor, the ones that we showed, right? So I guess I say that to say that that it doesn't mean that congestion isn't happening on other corridors, doesn't mean that AM peak congestion isn't happening in other places. It just told the most interesting story when we began this analysis, and we wanted to keep the same corridors going to the 2023 report.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then, yeah, it'd be pretty much that was a question I had. And then this adjustment for the key congestion locations. And so what is the answer? How can this be solved in between to actually look at the adjustments? Because traditionally there's certain corridors that have aging. So those areas may have changed. You may have lost population. Those areas may have picked up more retail, so you have less people traveling on certain routes. Or other areas, I would say, as we talk about the region here, well, we're getting a lot of uptick in Brighton and Commerce City of people moving out of the Denver metro area up into the tier 1 and 2 areas from the city, and really need that disconnect, which is transportation. And I think people, if they had a choice, even if it's just a few routes in the morning, a few routes in the evening, they would use them. So hopefully this study will help push more, not only ridership, but opportunities in those areas that have been built out. Because when I've been in this area since 2004, it was like 28,000. Now we're at 72,000 in Commerce City, and Brighton's growing as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Kelsey, and then Director Levy.
Thank you, Chair. I had just a few comments. One, when we were talking about the office vacancy numbers, I think one thing that might be influencing that to be lower than might be expected is that there have been not huge numbers of them, but some have office buildings that were under occupied have been converted to residential uses. So had that not happened, you'd be looking at a lot more vacancies than we're actually showing. The housing costs, I think maybe in the metro as a whole, and taken as an average, may not really be higher than the norm, as has been affected by teleworking. But I think smaller communities that are laying a little bit further away from the metro area, I think that definitely has seen a large increase in housing costs, because if you're not dependent on commuting to your job, the tendency is going to be to move further out of the city. And I know Georgetown's just experienced a huge increase in housing costs, and I would say it feels like we're way above the norm, but that may be just what feels it feels stronger just because it's closer to home. Gosh, I thought I had a third comment, but it's escaping me. So thank you. It was a good presentation.
Thank you. And I do just want to say very quickly, I think that's really important context, right? This is all at the 30,000 foot level. It will look a little bit differently at a more granular level.
Director Levy.
Thank you. Max, thanks so much for the presentation. And I'm trying to pick out the good kernels that are in here. I don't want to really think about 2050 too much. And it's really striking, and this has been a consistent thing that we've seen on your VMT slide, that pretty steep decline from, it looks like it's right around like 2006, down dipping to 2012, 2013 VMT per capita. And so then I wonder, what were we doing right then that we aren't doing now and we need to do more of? I know, I mean, I have some insights into that because this was anyway, I have some insights into that, but I think there was such a concerted push towards transit back then through all kinds of policy levers. And of course, RTD had a much more robust network then. But I think it is worth, that's maybe simplistic, but I would think it'd be really worth looking at all the different aspects of travel behavior that contributed to that real progress, because the blue line, goes up a little bit, but total VMT with the increase in population, was kind of flat. So that's a pretty big success to have achieved during that period. And I think we ought to really try to go back and examine that. Just the other thing I wanted to point out, on the zero fare for better air, like, it's not like dramatic here, but there is an uptick. And then it goes back down. So the lesson isn't, oh, well, it didn't work. We might be taking the wrong lesson. I might look at that and say, we should try expanding that and see whether you can sustain and even grow that, because, I do have to get out a magnifying glass to see that the line is going up, but, but it did go up. So I guess those are just two observations that I would make from this, and I'd love your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so in terms of VMT, let me gather my thoughts first, I guess. Yeah, I think with VMT per capita, we were doing something interesting. I think that I think the recession probably played a part in VMT per capita reduction. And then secondly, I think you are onto something about the transit piece too, right? I think our transit system was designed to be a commuter system, bringing a lot of people into the center of the region to be able to work in an office environment. So I think both of those dynamics are at play with VMT per capita. But you're right. I think there's more sort of investigation we could do into that. Yeah, and then in terms of the transit ridership piece, yeah, you're right. It isn't a dramatic increase in ridership from those policies. But yeah, I just wanted to call it out just because, it is the closest we've been to 2019 in those months, at least as far as we've seen in the data so far. And I'm sure there's 2024 data available now, but yeah, and it'll be curious again to see how an increase in service levels will impact ridership on the transit side.
Well, and I actually took that as encouraging there, and I just think we didn't give it long enough to really test and see what a difference it would make. And I'll just push back a little bit on attributing the decline in VMT per capita to the recession, because the recession didn't really kick in here in Colorado until well into 2009, and then we were coming out of it already then by 2011, and we were already on a pretty steep downward trend on VMT per capita, and continued that even as we went into recovery. So I think I think we just really need to go back and look at the policy levers that were in place, and a lot of different data to understand what we were doing right back then. having recessions shouldn't be the solution to traffic congestion, nor should having global pandemics.
Director Papsdorf, then Director Saroy, and then Director Odorizio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Directors, I hadn't intended to jump in front of other directors and their comments. I was trying to wrap some things together, and thank Max for the work and the team for the work and the analysis, and just reinforce the message that, we do a lot of work to sort of forecast the future, but that's not our destiny. That doesn't have to be the region's destiny, but it's informative to help us in our efforts. As Director Levy alluded to, like, we can think about what we can do if we want some different outcomes. So I want you to think about those things and what you saw in this presentation as we move into the discussion with Alvin about scenario planning and the development of the next regional transportation plan, because there are things that we can consider doing to try to kind of bend that curve and change sort of what potential outcomes we have. But this work and the analysis of the trends really raises a lot of questions for us to think about what we might look at during that planning process. And I think, Director Levy, to the transit ridership piece, you think about sort of the impact of the changes in how people work and where people work and how our transit system is currently deployed, right? And if downtown Denver office occupancy vacancy rates are at 25%, 3 times what the regional vacancy rate is. And we have a transit system that was designed and operates to try to funnel a lot of people at the same time from around the region into downtown. And if that sort of dispersion of employment and different work styles is going to persist, do we need to take a serious look at changing how we think about deploying transit resources around this region to be able to draw more people back to the system? And, those are big questions that no one really has the answers to, but we can go through our planning process to think about them and explore some what if scenarios to decide kind of what we can do together moving forward. So I just want to tie a lot of those things together because a lot of this information really raises a lot of questions for us and will inform our conversations with you as we move through the development of the next regional transportation plan.
Director Saroy.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add to or kind of respond to some of the comments made around transit from the presentation, because a couple things that we've been seeing, really looking at some of the data and then looking at some of the data that we've been getting from the Downtown Denver Partnership is that, daytime populations downtown are, about 65% of what they were pre-pandemic, at least some from what we've seen. So that's a real impact on us because that means that, 1 to 2 days a week, people aren't commuting so that they are, not using transit. And if you think about that in terms of that affects the ridership, and those kind of impacts are more pronounced the further out you get. And I think, which is why you see a lot of our parking lots not very full. And so, that we are, and like Director Norell said, we are adding some service now. We've gotten over the hump, I think, in terms of being able to add service because of we're hopefully kind of over the hump with our workforce issues. And so we should be doing that. The other thing I wanted to kind of touch on was the Zero Fare for Better Air piece, because, with the current, the latest funding that was available from the Colorado Energy Office, we didn't have the opportunity to kind of do another Zero Fare for Better Air. But what we did instead was focused on the Zero Fare for Youth, which one of the things I was going to highlight later in my comments, but I'll just highlight now, is we've just done an analysis and the impact from that has been quite substantial, because if we compare September 2023 to September 2024, because we just did a report for the CEO office, we had a 91% increase in youth ridership. So we're seeing some very, pretty big numbers, and we're hoping to do those. So we want to add to that, because I do think that is something that we want to build upon. And like I said, and continue to add service so we can continue to build up, kind of the ridership, that from the slow kind of buildup that we've had thus far.
Thank you, Director Saroy. Director Odorizio.
Yeah, I'd like to, I think we should have drill down into some of those other things that may or may not appear to be related, and there is a difference between correlation and causation. But I do appreciate Papsdorf's, sorry, I do appreciate Papsdorf's talking about the overall hub and spoke model of the whole region's transit, where it's all Denver centered. And you can do great with transit only if you're going to and from Denver, but we don't have a lot of those lateral connections. If somebody wants to get from 120th in my community over to 120th somewhere else, they can get there, but it's not as easy as it is designed for these other areas. So I think we need more of a meshed network, and I think we could work toward that. So I think that was an important observation. I appreciate us putting that on the table for some analysis. I'd also be interested in understanding back in the 2000s, how does that sound? Like 20 years ago in the 2000s, that we would look at what's the different patterns of growth, who was coming into our community at the time. I also think it's important to note that during that time where we were starting to see those increases, we were also introducing new service, introducing new funding, and it was exciting, and it drew a lot of people in. And I think that might have created some excitement and some optimism and about transit. And since that time, I think a lot of folks have become frustrated with some of how convenient or not convenient transit can be. And then we cannot overlook the challenges of not just convenience, but the feeling of safety that people have on the system. And I don't blame RTD for that. In fact, what I think we need to do is take a bigger look at how we address public safety issues. Because for a long time, we were trying these interesting experiments in public safety to say we're going to allow things that we may not have allowed back in 2008. And I think there's bigger picture things here for us to really consider in our analysis.
Thank you. Any other comments? will just ask Max one question. That we've gotten this in our packet now. Is this going to be on DRCOG's website? Is it going to be accessible to our staff at our local jurisdictions?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I think we wanted to get it, to you all first, but I think after this meeting, we're ready to host it online. So
great. Good job. Thank you very much, Max.
Thank you,
All
Mr. Chair.
right. Any other comments or questions? I thought I heard something. No, if not, we'll remind you that we are going to postpone the Crash Data Consortium update until probably next month. And we're going to skip over that, and we're going to go to item number 13, the 2050 region. Here we go, 2050 again, Director Levy. Regional Transportation Plan Scenario Planning. And we've got a presentation. This is attachment J in your packet. And Alvin Badal Sanchez, Manager of Transportation Planning and Operations. Alvin?
Thank you, Chair. I'll get my screen share going and we can go into my item.
Sounds good.
All right. Someone confirm that they're seeing my screen and presentation view?
Not yet.
One moment then. Tech issues, apparently. How about now?
No, we're only seeing your happy face, Alvin.
Give me one moment.
There we go. It's coming up. It says double click to enter full screen mode. There we go.
Perfect. Well, sorry about those quick tech issues. Hopefully that's the only ones we have during this meeting. But my item is a follow-up to a discussion that we had 2 weeks ago at board work session. Staff wanted to get back together and share the results from all of the different sessions we've had with our committees. So in addition to talking to the Board of Directors, we've also discussed this item with our Regional Transportation Committee, the Transportation Advisory Committee, and internal staff as well. So we wanted to share those compiled results for you. So this is related to a pretty major activity that we do during the update to our 2050, or wanting to do for the update to our 2050 MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan. This was a very pivotal exercise 4 years ago, really impacted the investment mix that we included in our regional transportation plan, and has been a really great resource for state partners, local partners, and regional partners. And so we want this next cycle of scenario planning to continue to be as momentous and help define the investment priorities that we're showing in our regional transportation plan. So as this effort closes out in the orange bar on your screen, we want to make sure that it's impacting the candidate projects bar that we hope to begin in summer of 2025, that ultimately gets us to a fiscally constrained recommendation of investment priorities. We kicked off this scenario effort in September with internal staff conversations, gathering that staff feedback using the same Mentimeter exercise and same questions that we asked of the board. In October, we went before the TAC, both in terms of introducing the update to the regional transportation plan and also gathering feedback for what this potential scenario cycle could look like. November, we continued that conversation with the Regional Transportation Committee, both in terms of the kickoff and scenarios feedback, and we were able to provide the kickoff presentation to the Board of Directors at your November meeting. And then we came back at the December board work session to have that longer discussion around scenarios, run through those Mentimeter exercises and gather feedback. And so since then, we've compiled all of that. And so we want to share those, and staff will begin defining what are some potential scenarios that we could be testing as we move into the new year. And so spring of next year, we want to continue that definition. We want to start modeling and testing these scenarios, especially testing so we can see if there's any surprises in the results that we get. We want to run to ground anything that we do find, make sure that we trust the results that we're seeing come out of this work, and then share the results. This was a 60 to 70 slide presentation about 4 years ago, a lot of press at the time, and it's ultimately had a pretty long life. So we want to make sure that we're sharing great results that continue to inform the region and our own planning work. I'm going to run through a number of word clouds that are based on each of those 6 questions we asked. I will acknowledge that there is some theming on each of these. So on your screen right now, you're seeing older adults really pop off in terms of the number of responses we got around that. There was some theming around this. So we might have gotten responses around growing older adults, increasing older adults, more older adults. They've been combined into a larger older adults category. But from the slide on your screen, you're seeing that there's also interest in working from home. We just heard in that presentation continued increase, higher than previous pre-pandemic work from home rates, but a potential decline in that number. Slower population growth and fewer workers also came up pretty consistently across each of those committees, each of those groups. But from the number of other responses that you're seeing on this screen, you can also see that there was just a lot of other topics that folk were wanting to potentially explore through this scenario work. So interest in other post-COVID trends, the stickiness of those, growing diversity in the region in addition to just older adults, continued increases in multimodal options. So from this first question, while there was some consensus around 3 or 4 major topics to potentially explore, there's still a lot of interest in other topics that could impact growth and mobility in the region. Shifting to emerging economic trends, e-commerce and work from home were the 2 main responses. Work from home, you'll see that pretty consistently across a lot of these responses. How are folk traveling differently now post-pandemic, and how is that changing as we get further and further away from that peak pandemic period? But also a continued interest in e-commerce, how we're all potentially shopping differently now in this post-pandemic world. But then you can also see there's interest in artificial intelligence, a service-based economy, housing affordability. And so some of these interesting to potentially try and explore, see if we can. I'm sure the jury's still out on artificial intelligence, its potential benefits, its potential impacts to either growth or mobility. But similar to the demographics question, you're seeing a lot of other responses that didn't rise to that same level as e-commerce, work from home, AI, thoughts around high cost of living, home delivery, autonomous vehicles. How are we taking into account increasing recreation opportunities at the same time as we're expecting a slower growth in our population? And so a lot of responses to this one. And while we were able to get some major themes out of this question, still just a lot to parse through in terms of responses. When it comes to technological advances, a little more cohesion around the different responses. Microtransit, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and autonomous vehicles were the main responses we got to this question. You're seeing fewer responses in general to this slide, and so a lot more consensus on what folk were interested in as we explore what potential technological advances could impact the way people move in the region. We did attempt to test autonomous vehicles 4 years ago. That one at that point was just a range of impacts. The jury was still out on what potential negative, potential positive impacts AVs could have in the region. So we ultimately did end up just showing a range of impacts versus some more clear results like we did with some of the other scenarios. Other topics like drone delivery on this slide could help inform other products that DRCOG has. So we are about to kick off a freight plan update. And so this could be one topic of interest that we explore in that effort. How can we continue to make progress in this conversation outside of just the scenario planning work or the regional transportation plan? When it comes to changes in land use patterns, a lot of those responses were coming out of state mandates that have recently come into play. So you're seeing density, redevelopment, infill pop up as major responses, but also continued suburban development occurring in the region. You just heard about office building vacancy at a regional level, but some interesting data points related to downtown Denver. Compared to the previous slide, potentially a little more responses, so less consensus around major themes, but density being the major response to this one, but other ones that can impact other products and processes that we have here at DRCOG. The next two, you'll see a similar thread, but in terms of environmental changes, wildfire was the major response there, followed by water availability, more extreme events in general, heat increasing in the region. There are fewer responses in general to this slide that were distinct. And so more consensus around these 3-4 major topics, but some other ones that, like I've mentioned, we can touch on in other potential products that we have, either the freight plan or other plans and processes that we kick off. A couple of these interesting to potentially test. At the bottom of the screen, you're seeing disaster hardened infrastructure. What does it really mean to have a resilient transportation network here in the region? We already know our projects are expensive and they're expensive to maintain. How do we afford a disaster resilient transportation infrastructure system? And then our final question, potential disruptions or emergencies. Flooding was a major response in this one, again, followed by wildfire. Water shortage, water availability came up quite a bit too in terms of development capacity, but you're seeing heat, potential recessions in the future to respond to disaster hardened infrastructure again. And so while there were some major themes around particular one-off events, potentially flooding, wildfire, you're seeing a number of other responses related to evacuation, food availability, grid infrastructure, as there's more electric vehicle, electrification in general. How is our grid structured to withstand that greater need? So from all those responses across those 6 questions from 3 different bodies and internal staff, there were some pretty consistent themes heard. So a growing older adult population and their associated changes in needs and priorities. We know older adults live differently, travel differently, have different priorities, needs, services. And so how are we capturing that in either the scenario work, our regional transportation plan? How can we continue to explore what that looks like and how its impacts are felt in the region? Increasing disruptions and environmental impacts from climate change on our infrastructure. What does it mean to be a resilient region? What does it mean to have a resilient transportation network? Like I mentioned, we already know our projects are expensive. Making sure that they're resilient, redundant, adds additional costs to that. So how can we reflect that potentially in our regional transportation plan or in our scenario work? The continued proliferation of new technologies. AI was the major response this cycle. 4 years ago, it wasn't really on the horizon in terms of our scenario planning work at the time. Like I've mentioned, we did try to test autonomous vehicles, but the range of impacts were so great that we ultimately just showed that range versus any particular results in terms of mobility or growth. And then this presentation and the previous one, that staying power of post-COVID trends. While we do continue to have a high telework rate, that potential decline over the next few years, what does that do to mobility in the region, to growth in the region? Home delivery, that increase in home delivery based on the pandemic, the potential fewer needs of mortar, brick and mortar retail, and then the continued increases in e-commerce. So some of these, like I've mentioned, can potentially touch on other topics, other plans, products that we have at DRCOG. The one that I've mentioned that's on my mind is just the regional freight plan at the moment, because we are kicking that off, but we are doing a lot of work in other spaces around climate, around housing, around multimodal mobility. So we want to make sure that the feedback we heard here doesn't just inform our scenario planning work or the regional transportation plan, but other products that we can continue to explore these interests. So potential impacts. We do want this scenario planning exercise to ultimately inform our fiscally constrained list of investment priorities. Like I had touched on 2 weeks ago during the board work session presentation, and we'll continue to always note the scenario planning work 4 years ago really changed our project mix in the regional transportation plan. And it's continued to be a resource for us here at DRCOG, as well as being leveraged by other local, regional, and state partners. And so we want to make sure that the revisions that we make to our regional transportation plan are being guided by the scenario planning exercise this cycle. There's potential to include more information in our regional transportation plan. Chapter 2 right now is our current conditions, our policy section of the plan. What is DRCOG's stance towards Vision Zero, complete streets, multimodal mobility? Is there more information we should be including on current conditions, on potential avenues to explore as an agency? New metrics to evaluate priorities. Chapter 4 is our measuring success of the plan. We bring together different outcomes targets that are established in Metro Vision, in our regional transportation plan, and other modal plans like our Vision Zero target, and taking action on regional Vision Zero. As we evaluate projects, as we continue to track progress, are there other ways and new metrics we should be including in our plan to show that effort? And then last, but certainly not least, continued guidance and direction for future planning activities. Like I mentioned, we want to make sure that this full compiled list of feedback can be shared with other products as we continue to work on those. How can it inform other work that we're doing at the agency and not just our regional transportation plan? Then before I get to my final slide, I do want to do a reminder of our approach to scenario planning that DRCOG has historically taken. They have been large what-if futures. They are relative comparisons, so these are not rigorous, and we're ultimately not choosing a scenario. Other agencies, other regions might do a batch test of projects to see ultimately what avenue do they want to go down. Scenario A, batch of projects, scenario B, batch of projects. And that is not what we did this last cycle. It's not what we anticipate doing this cycle either. But it's really for us looking at the choices and trade-offs that occur when we make certain decisions in the region and how that impacts growth and mobility for the region. And so ultimately providing guidance for us as staff and our committees and board as we develop our plan. What are the outcomes we want to achieve, the choices and trade-offs we're okay with, and providing direction as we move forward into the RTP update. So immediate next steps, we want to take this feedback and begin defining potential scenarios. Like I mentioned, we also want to start modeling and testing. We want to make sure that the results we're getting out of this work make sense. That's not, if something surprises us, do we trust that result? And then ultimately sharing these results with the committees and you, the board, as we get further into next year, so we can make sure that these results have an impact on our candidate project solicitation and evaluation process. So with that, Chair, that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Any comments, questions? Director Levy.
Hello, thank you. My mouse was a little jumpy. I couldn't get it to stand still. On the word clouds that you did, was that where did all that input come from? I sort of remember us doing some work on this through Mentimeter, but what were the sources of input onto that?
Yeah, so it was the 6 questions that were asked at the board work session 2 weeks ago through that Mentimeter exercise. It was the results from you, the board, as well as results we got from our regional transportation committee, our transportation advisory committee, and then a core group of staff at DRCOG. So it's a compiled list of results from each of those 4 distinct audiences.
Okay, that's I knew we did it, and then I thought that's what your slide early on said. I guess I would just be kind of curious. You know, there are people that do a lot of forecasting and look at trends and things like that. I'd be really curious how people like that, whose job it is to look into the future and think about these things, you know, how what they would come up with differs from what we would come up with. You know, it's just to maybe ground truth. You know, we're a series of kind of motley collection of elected officials, and yeah, I just kind of wonder about that.
I appreciate the question. On that, part of the audience that I mentioned in terms of staff was trying to leverage our professionals here at DRCOG in terms of our modeling staff on the transportation and land use side, and bringing in our different expertise with those questions to make sure we're having some different level of expertise. I would say everyone here is also an expert in regional mobility and growth in the region, in their communities. So I would say we're trying to marry both of those with the different audiences that we took. But I appreciate the question around another audience we could be checking with these questions.
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't mean to denigrate the expertise on staff at all. And then just one other thought that I think maybe we didn't really bring forward quite as strongly as we could have. I think it's on the potential disruptions or emergencies, and you know, power outages they're pretty small. You have to really hunt to find it, and insurance are there as well. But you know, I think we're not really fully seeing the challenges that our transmission grid is going to be experiencing. And you know, this is something that the decarbonization group is I'm sure going to be looking at a lot as that work goes forward. But you know, we have a grid that is really 19th century, and we're putting a lot of extra use on that grid, and climate change is impacting the energy grid, and I don't think we really focused on that quite as much as we should have, and thought about the implications of those vulnerabilities and the ways that we need to really invest in transmission in order to bring about all the other things that we want to bring about here.
Thank you, Director Levy. Any other comments or questions? Director Nurmilla.
I just wanted to underline that point because Excel continues to say that they don't have the capacity for the electrification that we're looking for. And I do worry about how that impacts, you know, even our requirements for EV. You know, we have a great model code for EV and solar readiness and efficiency. And, you know, if we continue on this great track, I don't want us to be rolling into brownouts or anything like that. So how do we have more energy production? I think Excel said their last new, I'm trying to think of when their last new energy production facility in Colorado was, or even just for themselves, was created, but it was back in the 80s. So we need more energy resources. Anyway, so thank you, Director Levy, for saying that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Alvin, you did a great job.
Chairman.
This was, go ahead.
Director Douglas has his hand up.
Okay. For some
It's okay.
reason, it's not even showing up on my screen.
Thank
Director
you.
Douglas.
Yes, yeah, we do have a aging infrastructure here in Colorado, and I sit on the board for United Power, and as a co-op, they've been doing very good to future-proof the network. But until we get the Southwest Power Pool here in Colorado, once that comes into our region, then things will get better with the transmission, and that hopefully will be in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Anyone else? All right, Alvin, again, great job. We appreciate it. And we're gonna go ahead and I would direct your attention to our informational items and the information in packet numbers K, L, and M. We're gonna move on to committee reports. I'm going to ask that these reports be brief and reflect decisions made and information that's important to the business of DRCOG. The State Transportation Advisory Committee, Director Odoricio. Steve, are you there? He may have had to sign off. I'm not seeing him on my list of folks. Okay, we will move on to report from Metro Mayor's Caucus. Director Starker.
Thank you very much, Chair. The caucus has not met since our last meeting, so I have none to report except to wish all the directors a very happy holiday season from the Metro Mayor's Caucus, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wasn't able to get to the holiday event this year, so I know that you all met, and along with the MAC, the Metro Area County Commissioners. I don't believe Director Teal is here. Director Rex, do you have an update from them?
No, sir. We did not have a regular meeting in December.
Okay. Report from the Advisory Committee on Aging, Director Jayla Sanchez-Warren.
Hello, happy holidays to everyone. I gave a report to the Advisory Committee on Aging on, at that time, it was hot off the presses, the Senate Bill 40 report. You might remember that this report was required by the state legislature and asked the State Unit on Aging to evaluate the adequacy and appropriations of the appropriations for the state funding for senior services. That's our state funding. I'm hoping to be able to give you a presentation on that in the next couple of months. Rich gave a legislative update, including the governor's budget request, changes in the legislature, how that might impact the Area Agency on Aging, and then issues expected to be of most concern. We had a presentation by Jody Waterhouse. She is from CU Anschutz, and she's on the Colorado Commission on Aging, told us what they're doing. She also is the chair of a group of aging advocates from other places like the Ball Policy and AARP, and told us, it's called the Advocacy Huddle, and told us what they're doing and what they were planning to do for the next year. And then we had a presentation on the current status of our internal transportation voucher program. This is a program that we started a few years back. It's become really popular. We talked about our new contractors, the addition of MedRide, which increases our ability to serve people in wheelchairs and increases our service area. We have a new call center that approved access. We can now have people can make their own transportation appointments on demand, no 3-day waiting period, and expanded hours from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. Again, this is very popular program, so popular that now we have a waiting list. We had to develop a waiting list criteria. And we, I talked to you about the funding cuts that we had last year, and we are great in capacity. We have a ton of capacity, but we don't have enough money to fund those rides. So it's a challenge, I'll tell you. And it was a busy meeting with lots of conversation and a lot of information.
Thank you, Director Sanchez Warren. Director Rex, do you have an update on the RAC?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, we did have a regular scheduling meeting on December 6th, and it was primarily a lot of administrative items. We approved the RAC budget and work program for 2025. We had a conversation about a legislative engagement policy for staff going into the next legislative session. Had conversations for future action on the RAC bylaws and the employee handbook. Yeah, so it was pretty administrative. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. E470, Director Mulvey.
Hi, happy holidays, everybody. I have a big list of things that I'm going to reduce down. There were some resolutions to celebrate and thank the service of Commissioner in Adams County, Chaz Tedesco, and Commissioner in Arapahoe County, Bill Holen. And we really appreciate their service over the years. Their takeaways, which I want to share with you, are never assume, be tenacious, and don't let politics get in the way of good governance. And I think we embody that here at DRCOG. And then there were a lot of contract amendments, a big budget but a budget overview. The toll rates are not going up. The things are being managed very conservatively as always. The snow removal contract was improved and adopted, and there were also some other action items, but we'd rather celebrate Christmas. So with that, I will conclude my report.
Thank you very much, Director Mulvey. CDOT, Director Pakbaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The commission had a short meeting earlier today, where a rate change to the state infrastructure bank based off of the Fed rate. They also had a resolution on the Burnham Yard East line easement and taking care of that property. The only other thing I would mention is myself gave a quick talk to the DRCOG TAC about a new funding program from the non-attainment enterprise that is giving out $17 million for communities for reconnecting non-occupancy vehicle travel, reconnecting communities, and reducing environmental impacts. So that was given on there. Other than that, happy holidays to everybody on the board, and travel safe if you're traveling this holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will note that Director Papsdorf did say that in chat that STAC did not meet this month. So that's good to know. We have a report from RTD, Director Siroy.
Thank you, Chair. And again, happy holidays, like everybody said, to everybody. A couple things to note. On December 3rd, our board did adopt our 2025 budget, $1.2 million budget with a focus on a couple of things just to highlight continued increased service in our 2025 budget, continued addressing of our workforce needs and increasing needs for workforce, and also, a focus like we have been for the last few years on state of good repair projects. So we feel like, again, we're very happy with the budget and excited about some of the increases that we can see. Also, on December 13th, we did finalize the facilities and fleet transition plan blueprint. That really sets out kind of a phased approach for us to look at a transition to zero emission over time. It is a big step for us in terms of really looking at how comprehensively we as an agency can transition and how it impacts things like facilities and other things that are many people don't realize when you look at actually transitioning to zero emission. Also, I'll point out that on New Year's, so from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. New Year's Eve to 7 a.m. New Year's, we will have zero fare. So anyone who needs to use transit and wants to partake in the libations of New Year's Eve can feel free to take it for free. And last, like I also mentioned, we did have our first report to the CEO office on our Zero Fare for Youth, the grant that we received this past legislative session. And again, very happy with the results, which again showing a nearly a doubling of youth ridership over the past year.
Thank you very much, Director Soroy. I will add my holiday wishes for everyone. Our next meeting is January 15th, 2025, and I hope everyone is safe, warm, and drama-free this holiday season. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.